This is Fat to Fierce. Welcome to the Confidence Chronicles. I'm your host, Amy English. Join me on this empowering adventure towards a healthier relationship with food, body, and self, one delicious bite at a time. Welcome to episode 27 of the Confidence Chronicles. I'm your host, Amy English, and I hope you are having a great week so far. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about 3 steps to stop stress eating. This is one of my favorite topics, and I actually created a workshop on this very topic, which you can get on my website at amyenglishcc.com/resources. Just head over there, enter your email address, and you will have access to watch the workshop that I created on this topic, which goes into a little bit more detail, but I am going to cover a lot in this episode today. So I also invite you to grab something to take notes with, okay? Especially if you are someone who wants to understand more about stress eating and wants to stop stress eating. All right, without further ado, let's dive in, shall we? So what is stress eating? Well, stress eating is exactly what it sounds like. It's using food as a coping mechanism for dealing with stress. It can involve reaching for your favorite comfort foods, overeating, binge eating, or even mindless snacking when you're not physically hungry. And some examples of stress eating sound like this. Maybe you're feeling overwhelmed at work and mindlessly munching on a bag of chips from the vending machine, like you polish them off without realizing what happened. Or life throws a curveball, like an unexpected work deadline or stressful news about a loved one, and you find yourself reaching for a pint of ice cream or going to the store to get some. Or another, you have a long day, right? You're feeling drained. And so you're mindlessly munching on any snacks you find in the pantry, even your kids' Teddy Graham crackers. Now, I don't even know if they still make Teddy Grahams, but that used to be one of my things when my kids were little. After we put them to bed, I would be standing in front of the pantry, shoveling handfuls of Teddy Graham crackers into my mouth, okay? So that's like a real example. So why do we want to stop stress eating? Well, lots of reasons, right? This habit can become a real roadblock to achieving your goals, especially when it comes to balanced eating and weight management. But even more than that, see, stress eating actually causes more stress in a lot of cases, especially for those of us who are working on balanced eating and weight goals, right? Or just being healthier. Because when the habit strikes, when we find ourselves stress eating, that actually creates more stress, along with frustration and other emotions. And then what happens? Well, then we eat more, right? Because we want to soothe that stress. And it just kind of becomes this vicious cycle. So there's a lot of benefits to stopping this habit. Okay. As you know, if you've listened to any of the previous episodes, I battled with stress eating for a very long time. I can remember back to elementary school, which was like my earliest memory of stress eating, and just emotional eating, right? I can remember coming home from school being upset that the kids were making fun of me and sneaking food, because I used to sneak food at that time. And even into my adult years, what am I trying to say here? Let me just spit it out. When I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I've shared this before, back in 2013, in that first month of my diagnosis, I gained 30 pounds. And that's because breast cancer is stressful, right? And I was eating all the feelings at that time. And it was December. It was the holiday season. We had a plethora of cookies and brownies and all kinds of things. And I just ate through that entire month. And it was all stress eating. So I'm very intimately familiar with stress eating. And in this episode, I'm sharing 3 steps to help stop that habit. These are the steps that I followed, and they're the steps I teach my clients when we're working together one-on-one. I know that these steps work. So here we go. The first step to stopping stress eating is really awareness, okay? And what I mean by that is it's recognizing that stress eating is a habit. You hear me say that a lot. There's a reason for it. Stress eating is a habit. It's not who you are. You're not a stress eater. It's not your identity. And I know that this might sound simple, but it is a crucial shift in perspective that can change everything. Once you see stress eating as a habit and not who you are, that's when you start to take back the power and you begin to make conscious changes. And it's also important to know that stress eating is a common habit. A lot of people struggle with stress eating. I would venture to guess that probably about 80 to 90% of the population has stress, like stress eats, right? Maybe that's a little bit high, but I don't know. It's definitely more than 50%, I'm sure. Everyone I talk to has some experience of stress eating. Whether or not it becomes a real complicated cycle for them, that's a different story. But there's a lot of people where that happens too, like myself. Okay, anyway, let me not veer too off track here. All right. There are reasons that it is so common. And here's why. First of all, food is readily available. It's fairly convenient and often inexpensive. And I say that now, and I understand inflation and food has actually gotten more expensive, but let's take a look at it. Compared to other habits, food, I'm talking like alcohol, drugs, gambling, whatever, food is typically less expensive than those items, right? And that just makes it an easy go-to when stressed, having it readily available, convenient, and less expensive. And it's also more acceptable as opposed to those other habits I just mentioned. I mean, really. I have said this before. Nobody's getting arrested for polishing off a full carton of ice cream at work, okay? It's just not going to happen. I always used to say, like when my daughter was a Girl Scout, no one's going to get pulled over for eating an entire box of Thin Mints in their car, okay? It's just not going to happen. So that's what I mean by it's more acceptable, right? And many of us develop the habit of stress eating early on for a variety of reasons. There's so many reasons. Everyone has their own set of circumstances as to how and why this habit with food started. By recognizing it as a habit, by having that awareness, you stop blaming yourself and you start taking control. That's what I mean by the power shift. Right? Instead of being a passenger on this path where it feels like food is in the driver's seat, you take back the wheel. Now, does this mean that the habit magically stops? No! It takes time, patience, and effort. Go back to episode 26 if you haven't listened to it yet. That's where I talk about changing habits and how it can be messy sometimes, all right? Anyway, awareness is just the beginning, okay? We also need acceptance. We have to be willing to accept that this is a habit and that changing it requires our active participation. It's like pulling up the rug to sweep up the dirt. It's really important, accepting that you have this habit. Now, acceptance does not mean beating yourself up, all right? It simply means acknowledging that stress eating is a coping mechanism you've developed and you're willing to explore healthier, more balanced ways to manage stress. Your participation is key here. This is not a passive process. It takes effort and commitment on your part. Okay? So, step 2, got to ditch the food judgment. Food isn't good or bad, and neither are you. And we've talked about this in the previous episode about food language, right? When you judge yourself for eating bad food, it creates a cycle of shame that can worsen stress eating. So we want to change the language we use around food. Check out episode 14 of the Confidence Chronicles if you haven't listened to it yet, or go listen to it again. I go into depth on this topic. And it is an important step in stopping stress eating, which is why it continues to come up when I talk about it, right? So instead of bad and good when it comes to food, consider pleasure food and power food, or come up with language that works for you, right? Here's how I look at it. Pleasure foods, those are like the sweet treats, the French fries, the pizza, the chips, right? Pleasure foods are enjoyable and can be incorporated in moderation. Power foods, that's your lean proteins, veggies, fruits, whole grains. Power foods nourish your body and give you energy. This shift in language removes the moral judgment and helps you make conscious choices that feel good for you, feel good in your body physically. There is always room for both pleasure and power food. And here are some of the questions that you can start asking yourself to get curious, okay? So this is all part of step 2, right? Ditching the judgment around food. What are your power foods and pleasure foods? List them. What are your favorites? What are your favorite power foods? What are your favorite pleasure foods? Next, how do you feel when you eat them? Really note this, okay? And listen, if this sounds like fun, I've done this before. Take some of your favorite foods, right? Let's say, for example, one of your favorite pleasure foods is cake, okay? It's one of mine. Have a piece of cake. Notice how you feel when you eat it. Like, really notice how you feel physically after you eat that cake, and just make note of it, all right? Do the same thing with a power food. I don't know, let's just say like chicken or something. Have some chicken. Notice how you feel when you eat the chicken. Which one feels better? And how do you want to feel, right? We're not putting any judgment around this. We're just collecting the information. We're just collecting the data. So then you can decide how you want to feel and choose accordingly. You see how this works? It's fascinating. Okay, that's step 2. Remove the judgment around food and really get to know what foods feel like for you and how you want to feel. Okay. Step 3, practice the pause. I like to say that the pause is where the magic happens. Okay. This is the space between the urge to eat and the mindless eating response. Okay. So it's like when you hear the food voices, but before you take action to eat. This space is an opportunity to get curious about the food you crave. When the craving or food voices start, press pause on yourself. Just kind of mentally stop yourself and ask some questions. You're going to want to write these down. Am I physically hungry? Yes or no? What am I feeling and thinking right now? What's going on? Will food solve it? Such a powerful question. Is eating the solution? How will I feel after I eat this? Do I want to feel that way? What do I want more? And this could be, I want the food, or I want to focus on my goal, or I want the food, or I want to feel better, right? Like, you get to decide. There are no wrong answers in the pause. This is just an opportunity to take charge instead of being led by the craving. Now, you don't have to ask yourself every single one of those questions. You can if you want. It's entirely up to you. I think in the beginning, I was pretty much asking myself all those questions to start. And then it kind of all boiled down to, what do I want more? And I still use that question today. So yes, I still pause today. Here's the thing when it comes to practicing the pause. It's not, I'm going to share this from my own personal perspective, okay? My own personal example. It was not easy in the beginning to practice the pause. It was something that took effort. It was something I had to remember to do. It was something that I would forget about more often. But then the more I was willing to keep practicing, the more it kind of like gained its own momentum and just started becoming a normal part of my day. I still pause today. I will always check in. Now it's just become kind of ingrained in me where I just always check in when I notice, ooh, chocolate sounds good. I'm like, how will I feel after I eat that? Do I want to feel that way? What do I want more? Okay. So now it's just become like a natural part of how I respond, which is really powerful in itself. Okay. Practicing these 3 steps. So again, it's awareness, it's the removing the judgment, and it's practicing the pause. All 3 of these will put you on a better path with food and help you deal with stress in a healthier way. Starting with just one of the steps presented here today will have a positive impact in breaking the habit of stress eating. The whole idea, and this is where this is very different than going on another meal plan or following another program, okay? The idea is not to restrict food or punish yourself for eating. The goal is getting to a place where you know you're in charge. You're in that driver's seat. You're at the wheel. So food stops feeling like some form of kryptonite that leaves you powerless and drained. I used to always say that food felt like it was my kryptonite. Okay, if you can relate to that, then I'm definitely going to invite you to practice one, if not all of these steps, okay? Making conscious choices puts you in the driver's seat, and that's how food and body confidence is created, okay? If you're struggling with food and it gets in the way of achieving your goals, I get it. I wrestled with that for decades until I found a way to mend my toxic relationship with food. That is why I do this work. After decades of failed attempts, I don't even know how many failed attempts, y'all, okay? But after decades of it, I found a solution that works. And I've dedicated my coaching practice to helping others. So I say that because if you are ready to take control of your relationship with food and stop stress eating, I'm going to point you to my website again to get my free guide. It's called 5 Days to Food Freedom. It's amyenglishcc.com/resources. It is free. You just have to enter your email address and you will receive the guide. You can also book a discovery call to see how my method will help you and transform your relationship with food, okay? That's always an option that's available. And what that looks like, you schedule a time from my calendar, we meet on Zoom or the phone if you don't have Zoom, and we talk for an hour. And I ask a bunch of questions about, what you're struggling with and, kind of a little bit about, your story with food. I'll explain more about my coaching practice and how we work together one-on-one. And then you get to decide if it's something that sounds like a good fit for you or if we'd be a good fit working together. Okay. There's no charge for a discovery call. It is just there. So we get to kind of get to know each other a little bit better, see if coaching's a good fit and go from there. So seriously, if you are struggling and you want to stop this habit, I'm going to invite you to check out any of these resources, all right? Whether it's watching the stress eating workshop, getting the 5 Days to Freedom guide, or booking a discovery call with me. All right. I hope you have a great week. Until next week. Are you ready to take control of your eating, embrace your body, and boost your confidence? Then let's get fierce. Start your Fat to Fierce journey today. Go to amyenglishcc.com for more resources and to book your discovery call.